Hello, welcome to my ham radio tech course for the 2022 through 2026 question pool. My name is Rodney Biddle and I will be narrating this course for you today. This section is T1A, Commission's Rules, Purpose and Permissible Use of Amateur Radio Service, Operator Primary Station License Grant, Meanings of Basic Terms used in the FCC Rules, Interference, Gracie's rules, phonetics, and frequency coordinator. This section consists of 11 questions. This presentation is based on the layout of the questions and content based on Biddle's Ham Radio Study Guide, Technician Class 2022 through 2026. And yes, this is my book. This book covers the 411 questions plus additional content such as radio tips, repeaters, power planning tips, and choosing a radio and more. This book is currently available on Amazon.com. Okay, a note about the question number presentations. Questions may have one of two notes beside them on the slides and in the book. These notes will be one of the following: either an M, which represents a modified question. This is basically the same question as presented in the 2018 through 2022 pool, but with some slight type of a modification affecting the wording of the question or the answer. Or this may be a new question that was not present in the 2018 through 2022 pool. If the question does not have either of those notes, then the question was also in the older 2018 through 2022 pool with no changes. Now we'll move on to the first question. Okay, first question is T1A01, and this is a modified question from the prior pool. Which of the following is part of the basis and purpose of the amateur radio service? A, providing personal radio communications for as many citizens as possible. B, providing communications for international nonprofit organizations. C, advancing skills in the technical and communication phases of the radio art. Or D, all of these choices are correct. This question is found on page 3-2 in the book, and it is explained on page 5-2. The correct answer of these is C, advancing the technical and communication phases of the radio art. Okay, an explanation of the answer. The point with this question is to stress the emphasis of the consideration of ham radio as not only a technical hobby, but also considered as an art form. There's a heavy technical aspect to ham radio, formulas, science and engineering, but in many ways ham is an art as the best operators grow to understand all of the many factors that participate in the success of good radio communication using a variety of frequencies and different operating conditions. So once you become an experienced ham operator, you grow experience of understanding what different atmospheric conditions, what different daytime, nighttime situations, weather conditions will affect the operation of your ham radio, and also geographic areas where you're using your ham radio at, and how it affects the different frequencies, how your quality is affected based on frequencies and conditions. Okay, next question, T1A02. Which agency regulates and enforces the rules of the ham radio service in the United States? The options are A, FEMA, B, Homeland Security, C, the FCC, or D, all of these choices are correct. Our answer is C, the FCC. The FCC stands for Federal Communications Commission. Federal Communications Commission is an agency within the United States that oversees all rules and enforcement for all forms of radio operation in the United States. So this is not just ham radio, but this is televised communications, TV signals. This is telephone use, mobile phones, home phones, uh, CB radio, GMRS radio, any type of communications that exists. Airplane communications, aircraft, naval communications, marine, VHF radio. It's all controlled by the FCC. Okay, next question. What do the FCC rules state regarding the use of a phonetic alphabet for station identification in the amateur radio service? A, it is required when transmitting emergency messages. B, it is encouraged. C, it is required when in contact with foreign stations. Or D, all of these choices are correct. The correct answer to this is B, it is encouraged. So the phonetic alphabet for stereo operation is, you'll have heard it on movies or seen it on TV. It's the representation of letters with words. Words is easier, I'm sorry, words easier to understand what it represents than a letter. So many letters sound the same. C, E, B, D, those can be over radio communication harder to differentiate than Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Delta, Echo, so forth. So if you have difficulty remembering what's considered a normal word, use of other words is acceptable, such as A is for apple, B is in baseball, C is for Christmas, so forth. So you can use other words, but the phonetic alphabet has been established and has been used for decades and is well understood by most radio operators. Okay, moving on to the next question. T1A04. How many operator primary station license grants may be held by any one person? A is 1. 2 is no more than 2. I'm sorry, B is no more than 2. C is 1 for each band on which the person plans to operate. Or D is 1 for each permanent station located from which the person plans to operate. Now this question is referring to ham radio use and ham radio bands. It is not referring to CB radio, marine radio, any other type of radio system. So the answer to this is A, 1. The ham operator receives only one ham license. As you progress up to a general license or to an amateur extra license, your license will be upgraded to the next level. This does not apply to other types of licenses such as GMRS license or commercial operator's license, which is considered a separate license. For instance, GMRS is a general mobile radio service license. That is a separate license that you pay for. You do not test for that license. You can get a GMRS radio license for your family. It currently costs $35 for 10 years. All you have to do is go to the FCC website, fill out the information, pay for the license, and then you will be assigned a call sign using a different format than ham radio. But for ham radio operators, once you get your tech license, you turn around, you upgrade to your general license or your AE license, the FCC database is updated with that new information. Next question, T1A05. What proves that the FCC has issued an operator primary license grant? A, a printed copy of the certificate of successful completion of examination, an email notification from the NCVEC granting the license. The license appears in the FCC ULS database, or all of these choices are correct. The answer for this is C, the license appears in the FCC ULS database. Once your name makes it into the database, you are legal to start using your ham radio and start talking through repeaters. Just make sure you follow the basic rules, announcing yourself as you start your communication. There is a link here to where the FCC database is found that you can follow. At some point after your name is in the database, you should receive an email message with a link that you can use to download and print your actual FCC license. You should keep this with you when you are operating your radio as physical proof of your license status. So you do not need the email. You don't need uh, any type of a letter. What you do need though is you should have a printed copy of your FCC license when you're using your ham radio for communication. It can be looked up through the database, but having that paper copy is good practice. Our next question, T1A06. What is the FCC Part 97 definition of a beacon? A government transmitter marking the amateur radio band edges. B, a bulletin sent by the FCC to announce a national emergency. C, a continuous transmission of weather information authorized in the amateur bands by the National Weather Service. Or D, an amateur station transmitting communications for the purpose of observing propagation or related experimental activities. And our answer is D, an amateur station transmitting communications for the purposes of observing propagation or related experimental activities. Okay, a beacon station is a beacon that transmits a signal on a set frequency from a set location, allowing amateur operators to confirm their ability to receive the signal. Beacons exist in locations of the 28, 50, 144, 222, and 432 megahertz amateur bands, and all amateur bands above 450 megahertz. Transmitter power of a beacon must not exceed 100 watts. So basically a beacon helps you identify if you're able to pick up a signal or not. If you're able to hear it and you know that the beacon has been published with an established location, then you'll know what your distance is from that beacon. Okay, next question, T1A07. What is the FCC Part 97 definition of a space station? A, any satellite orbiting Earth. B, a manned satellite orbiting Earth. C, an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Or D, an amateur station using amateur radio satellites for relay of signals. And our answer is C, an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Okay, so some hams experiment with the use of satellites for communication, which do exist orbiting the Earth. In addition to satellites, ham operators can also communicate with the International Space Station, or the ISS, on UHF and VHF frequencies. The ISS provides a unique communication opportunity for hams and VHF/UHF frequencies at distances that you will not normally be able to reach due to obstructions found on the ground. So take your handheld ham radio, your 5-watt radio. Some hams have been known to be able to communicate with the ISS space station on the ground when the ISS is passing directly overhead. You have no obstructions. You're much more likely to reach the space stations if you're using a higher power station, such as a 50-watt mobile unit, but some folks have actually been able to reach it from a handheld. Also, there are satellites, amateur satellites, that will repeat a signal and that you can communicate with too. So next question, T1A08. Which of the following entities recommends transmit receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations? So we're looking for an organization when they talk about entity. So our options are A, frequency spectrum manager, appointed by the FCC. B, volunteer frequency coordinator recognized by local amateurs. C, FCC field office. Or D, the International Telecommunications Union. Our answer is B, volunteer frequency coordinator recognized by local amateurs. A volunteer frequency coordinator is an individual or individuals who are local to a particular area that manage the frequencies and frequency assignments for purposes such as repeater operation to ensure that conflicts do not occur. So if a station is looking to set up a repeater, they will coordinate with their local volunteer frequency coordinator to make sure that nobody else is using that particular frequency or that particular frequency and PL tone combination. The volunteer frequency coordinator acts as a traffic cop of sorts by making sure that people don't conflict with each other, and traffic and communication problems are kept to a minimum. Next question, T1A09. Who selects a frequency coordinator? Our options are A, the FCC Office of Spectrum Management and Coordination Policy. B, the local chapter of the Office of National Council of Independent Frequency Coordinators. C, amateur operators in a local or regional area whose stations are eligible to be repeater or auxiliary stations. Or D, FCC Regional Field Office. Our answer to this is C, amateur operators in a local or regional area whose stations are eligible to be repeater or auxiliary stations. Okay. The selection of frequency coordinators in an area are selected by the local community of operators in that area. So the key to this is remembering that the frequency coordinator that works in an area is chosen by local operators in that area, not by the FCC, but by the actual operators and the repeater owners, generally repeater operators, individuals that have a high stake in making sure that conflicts don't occur. T1A10, T1A10. What is the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, or RACES? A radio service using amateur frequencies for emergency management or civil defense communications. B, a radio service using amateur stations for emergency management or civil defense communications. C, an emergency service using amateur operators certified by civil defense organizations, such as being enrolled in that organization. Or D, all of these choices are correct. Our answer is D, all of these choices are correct. Okay, so two popular emergency radio groups are RACES and ARES. RACES is specifically associated with civil defense communications. RACES organizations work more closely with local government agencies. RACES is different from ARES in that it is more closely tied to county and government agencies, where ARES, on the other hand, is associated with the ARRL, the Amateur Radio Relay League. RACES is activated before, during, and after an emergency and is active only during the emergency and following if government offices need their assistance. So the ARES group versus a RACES group, ARES is more independent. ARES may activate as a group. They generally do work with the county and government agencies. They are often an additional set of operators, amateur radio operators. So they're an additional resource. Quite often the ARES group works with the RACES group, but they're not quite as controlled as RACES is. T1A11. When is willful interference to other amateur radio stations permitted? A, to stop another amateur station that is breaking the FCC rules. B, at no time. C, when making short test transmissions. Or D, at any time, stations in the amateur radio service are not protected from willful interference. The answer is B, at no time. Okay, willful interference is the act of purposefully transmitting or causing interference with other radio operators. At no time is it considered to be allowed or acceptable. Interference that is not purposeful or willful but should be avoided at all times. So basically, we don't want to cause trouble. We don't want to try and be messing with other people, interfering with their communications. It's not good practice. It is not allowed by the FCC rules. And that is the end of this section. The next section will be covered in an additional video.